Israeli military continue to strike multiple targets in Gaza. The Israel Defense Forces released videos of airstrikes on buildings in Gaza City. The forces reported that approximately 250 military targets were hit. The targets were mostly in the northern Gaza Strip. IDF also confirmed that Mu'taz Eid, who was the commander of the Hamas Southern District of National Security, was killed. Palestinians gathered at the Rafah border crossing with Egypt, hoping to be able to leave Gaza ahead of an expected ground invasion by Israel. United States and international mediators appeared close to reaching a deal for a humanitarian ceasefire that would allow foreigners only to exit the enclave through the crossing. Gaza's food, water and medicine supplies are dwindling, while the blockade on international support remains in place. People gather at Israel's Haifa port ahead of boarding a boat as US evacuates citizens from Israel to Cyprus. The US embassy did not say how many people would be taken on the ship, but said that boarding will proceed in order to arrival and is on space-limited basis. With Israel moving towards an invasion of the Gaza Strip, the ship will leave from the port of Haifa for Cyprus. Each passengers will have to sign a document promising to repay the cost of the trip and will only be allowed to carry one suitcase. The US is going to arrange chartered flights from Cyprus till the borders of the United States. US President Joe Biden said that he is quote-unquote confident Israel will act under the rules of war in its conflict with Gaza. He added that mobilizing US troops for deployment is not necessary at the moment. In the same interview, Biden said that while Hamas must be eliminated entirely, there should be a path for a Palestinian state. The US president also cautioned that the threat of terrorism in the United States had increased due to unrest in the Middle East. The statement surfaced as the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is on a visit to the Arab countries to address the possible spillover of the Israel-Gaza war.
What happened in Gaza, in my view?
Israeli Finance Minister has said that the government is taking responsibility for the devastating Hamas attack. He said that they admit that the state and security establishment failed in maintaining the security of its Israeli citizens. The statement followed the Hamas attack that allowed militants to enter Israel and kill hundreds of Israeli civilians. He also said that the government failed to implement the unwritten contract of safety between any state and its citizens. The minister added that the contract that was written in blood is now stained with the blood of innocent Israelis. At least 5 Canadian citizens have been reported dead after last week's attack by Hamas on Israel. The family of a 22-year-old who was killed by the militants in the Kibbutz Music Festival confirmed her death on Instagram platform. She was the 4th Israeli-Canadian victim of the attacks, and like other countries, Canada is trying to evacuate its citizens, permanent residents and their families from Gaza. Canada is seeking to bring out at least 300 people from Gaza through the Rafah border crossing into Egypt. Moreover, the US government has also advised its citizens in Gaza to move towards the Rafah border crossing.
We can bring this.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that Arab countries are determined to stop a spillover of the Israel-Hamas war. The U.S. top diplomat said that this comes after his visit to Jordan, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. As per the U.S. State Department, Blinken on his visit discussed ways to keep civilians in Gaza out of harm's way and the evacuation of American citizens. At the end of the meeting, Blinken reaffirmed Israel's right to defend itself while insisting that it should be done in a way that avoids harming civilians. U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about U.S. military support and efforts to protect civilians. President Biden took to his social media platform X to call on all countries to condemn Hamas as a terrorist organization. He went on to say that Hamas does not represent the aspirations of all Palestinian people. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has announced that the administration may push a new weapons package for Israel that will be significantly higher than $2 billion. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that more than 200 nationals have been evacuated from Israel. The evacuees that included mostly women and children have been taken to Romania. Now, President Zelensky also said that at least 260 Ukrainians are still stuck in the Gaza Strip. He added that Ukraine is working with its partners to evacuate all its citizens. As per Ukraine's embassy in Israel, 207 Ukrainian citizens, including 63 children, were evacuated from Tel Aviv, and another flight to take 155 people out of Israel is currently underway. Separately, Ukraine's foreign ministry has sent a note of protest to Israel after Ukrainian citizens were not allowed to evacuate from Gaza on Saturday. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with the families of Israelis taken hostage or killed during the Hamas attack. During the meeting, the families called on Netanyahu to ensure their release. Israel is carrying out the most intense bombardment Gaza has ever seen in response to the killing of about 1,300 people. This comes after Hamas fighters rampaged through Israeli towns, launching a killing spree in their first strike on the country. This is claimed by Israel. The militants shot men, women, children and soldiers and reportedly seized hostages in the worst attack on civilians in Israel's history. Authorities in Gaza said that at least 2,670 people had been killed by Israel's retaliatory strikes. At least a quarter of the killed are children. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to return to Israel today to talk about the way forward after several days of shuttle diplomacy between Arab states. Before this, the U.S. top diplomat arrived in Jordan on Sunday as part of a trip to meet leaders from Arab states. The meeting came at the heels of Hamas's deadly attack on Israel last week. Blinken has said that the U.S. shared determination to ensure Israel's conflict with the Palestinian militant group Hamas does not spill over elsewhere in the region. Blinken arrived in Israel while it was preparing a ground offensive in the Gaza Strip in retaliation for Hamas's attack on civilians, reportedly. On the course of this trip, Blinken has also been to Qatar, Jordan, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and Egypt.
Thank you, press. Mr. Secretary, what we thank you, press. Thank you.
A video distributed by Israeli army said to show attacks on Hezbollah sites in southern Lebanon. The sudden attack launched earlier today comes in retaliation to Hezbollah's assault on Israeli army posts and a northern border village. Earlier, UN peacekeepers warned that border clashes between Israel and Lebanon have been escalating. Hezbollah's attack on a farming community that sits at the border fence killed one person and wounded 3 others. The militant group, as well as the Israeli medics, trumpeted it as the worst border violence since a month-long war in 2006. The Israeli military said that it had conducted strikes in Lebanon in retaliation, and it declared a zone within 4 kilometers of the Lebanese border off limits to public access. Thousands marched through the streets of Amsterdam in pro-Palestinian demonstrations. The protesters turned the central Amsterdam square into a sea of Palestinian flags and placards. 3 planes flew overhead trailing messages: "Love Hamas, not Hamas. Make falafel, not war. And Shalom, Salam." The route of the Amsterdam march was initially scheduled to end in Amsterdam's Old Jewish Quarter. The route was changed later to avoid potential confrontations.
Als de steun voor het recht op zelfverdediging van
Gaza has been imposed on and the world is accepting that.
Now, hundreds of people also rallied in Larnaca on the islands of Cyprus in support of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Demonstrators said that Palestinians have the right to defend themselves, as well as the right to demand freedom and independence. As Gaza grapples underneath barrages of rockets and bombardment, and the death toll continues to climb, global demonstrations have created a divide of their own. Marches around the world are seeing both parties garnering support and withstanding condemnation. Pro-Palestinian protesters rallied in Ottawa and gathered on Parliament Hill, calling for the end of Israeli occupation and waving Palestinian flags. The local media reported that there were thousands of people who attended the protest, where protesters chanted "Free Palestine" and called for justice. The protests were staged after Israel unleashed a ferocious bombing campaign over Gaza in retaliation for unprecedented attacks inside Israel by Hamas. Hundreds of Brazilians gathered in Rio de Janeiro in a show of support for Israel. The protest surfaced nearly a week after an attack by Hamas killed at least 1,300 people. Now, the residents took to the streets and marched near the iconic Copacabana beach in a demonstration holding flags and chanting in support of Israel. The protesters called for peace and honored the victims of the war. Earlier this week, Brazil's president spoke with Palestinian Authority president to evacuate Brazilians in the Gaza Strip. President Lula da Silva trumpeted that at least 700 Brazilians have been repatriated from the Gaza Strip. While condemning the terrorist attacks against civilians in Israel, Lula expressed his concerns around blockades to the humanitarian aid in Gaza. Over 1,000 people took to the streets of central Madrid to show their solidarity with the Palestinian people. The protesters condemned Israel's bombardment of Gazan civilians, which has killed over 2,000 people and left about 9,600 others injured in Gaza. Hospitals in Gaza are running short of supplies and are struggling to cope with the numbers of wounded being brought in. The crowd of protesters in Madrid chanted Israel terrorist state and held signs which read, "We are all Palestinians." The demonstration was organized by Palestinian groups based in Spain. In other news, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with Russia's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov, and the two met at Beijing's State Guest House. Now, the foreign ministers held talks ahead of a visit to Beijing by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Afghanistan has been jolted by a third earthquake within the span of a week. The powerful tremors of magnitude 6.3 injured at least dozens more in Herat, the same region where 1,000 people died just last week. The first earthquake was followed by aftershocks of magnitudes 5.4 and 4.2. Now, local authorities say that the quake has claimed at least 2 lives, while over 150 injuries have also been registered. The WHO has claimed that nearly 20,000 lives have been affected by the string of earthquakes that hit Afghanistan. A stream of leaders of emerging market countries are arriving in Beijing for a Belt and Road Initiative meeting organized by the Chinese government. Ethiopian Prime Minister landed in Beijing on Monday, following the Chilean President and Hungarian Prime Minister. Under the initiative, Chinese companies have built ports, roads, railways, power plants around the world in a bid to boost trade and economic growth. India's Allahabad High Court acquitted key accused Surendra Kohli and his co-accused Moninder Singh Pandar in the Nithari murder case. A bench of Justice Ashwani Kumar Mishra and Justice Syed Aftab Hussain Rizvi found Kohli innocent in a series of 12 cases. Kohli had previously been awarded the death penalty, and Pandar had received the death sentence in 2 separate cases. The UK government said that Britain and South Korea have agreed to extend a period of low or zero tariffs on bilateral trade by 2 years. Now, that comes just ahead of talks to forge a new trade deal that could provide a much-needed boost for the car industry. Without the extension, British businesses such as automakers and food and drink companies would have faced high tariffs from January 1st on exports of products made using materials from the European Union. An Australian regulator has fined Elon Musk's social media platform X for $386,000 for failing to cooperate with a probe into anti-child abuse practices. That's a blow to a company that has struggled to keep advertisers amid complaints that it is going soft on moderating content. The E-Safety Commission fined X, the platform Musk rebranded from Twitter, saying it failed to respond to questions including how long it took to respond to reports of child abuse material on the platform and the methods it used to detect it. China's central bank ramped up liquidity support to the banking system as it rolled over medium-term policy loans, but kept the interest rate unchanged. The People's Bank of China is walking a tightrope between keeping liquidity ample to aid a struggling economy and stabilizing the yuan amid expectations of a higher for longer US rates. Further monetary easing could widen China's yield gap, with the United States putting fresh downward pressure on the currency, which has lost roughly 5.5% against the dollar so far this year.